Why the global economy is going to shit. Have you ever looked around and thought, why does it feel like the world economy is breaking? Inflation, debt, political chaos, inequality, global tension. It's not just random. This is part of a much bigger pattern. It's the end of a long-term cycle that plays out again and again throughout history and has led to cataclysmic events like the Great Depression, World Wars I and II, and even goes back as far as the fall of the Dutch Empire in the 1600s. This cycle is called the long-term debt cycle. So what is the long-term debt cycle? Most people think of the economy in short 5 to 10 year cycles. Boom, bust, recession, recovery. But let's zoom out for a second. There's actually a bigger pattern that plays out over 75 to 100 years, a full lifetime. This is the long-term debt cycle, and as the name suggests, it all starts with debt. Here's how it works. 1. A country starts with low debt and strong economic growth. Governments borrow money to invest in infrastructure, education, military, etc. The debt begins to rise. 2. Over time, people, businesses and governments borrow more and more. More borrowing means more spending, which means more growth. So it feels like the country is getting richer and more prosperous, but the debt continues to grow. 3rd, eventually the debt gets too big. The government has to pay back the debt and the interest on the debt as well. The central bank steps in and they start printing money to pay off the debt. This leads to currency devaluation, since more money in circulation means the money everyone already has is less valuable. It causes inflation. This is the stage where the system starts to crack. Unfortunately, the US, Europe, and many other countries are now in the final stages of this debt supercycle. The US is currently $36.7 trillion in debt, and its interest payments alone are about $3 billion per day. The UK government is currently £2.7 trillion in debt. The three big forces. The global economy is being hit by three big forces all at once. Number 1, high debt plus money printing. We already talked about this. Too much borrowing and too much money in the system equals inflation and instability. 2, internal conflict. As people and companies borrow more, that money flows into assets like stocks, property, businesses. This means that asset prices go up. But rich people own most of the assets, whereas middle and lower income people mostly own wages. So when asset prices boom, the rich get richer while everyone else doesn't. This leads to the rise of populism and political extremism. When wealth gaps get too wide, people lose trust in the system. Sound like what's happening in the US, or France, or the UK? The data shows that this has happened again and again before major collapses. 3rd, external conflict. As one global power declines, another rises. That's what's happening now between the US and China. This is known as the changing world order. History shows that every 250 years or so, a dominant empire, like Britain or the Dutch, loses power while a new one rises. When the dominant power gets weak enough and the rising power gets strong enough, the rising power starts to challenge for the position of dominance. We're now entering one of these periods of great power conflict, with China rising to challenge the US position of dominance. If you want to learn about this in greater detail, I highly recommend reading Ray Dalio's book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. It's fascinating stuff, written by the founder of one of the world's largest hedge funds. Ray's been studying this stuff for years, and his research is the basis for this video. If you buy it from Amazon through the link in the description below, we'll earn a commission, so it would be a great way to help support the channel if you're enjoying the content. The rise and fall of empires. Dalio looked at 500 plus years of history, and he found a pattern in how empires rise and fall. Every great empire starts with investment in human capital, high quality education systems, a strong work ethic, and a cultural emphasis on discipline and productivity. This leads to a wave of creativity, innovation, and problem solving, all of which give a rising nation a competitive edge. For example, in the 1600s, the Dutch led with shipping technology. In the 1800s, the British industrialised. In the 1900s, the US surged ahead with mass production, science, and higher education. As innovation takes off, productivity increases, and the economy grows rapidly. The country becomes a leader in global trade, businesses expand, and profits rise. This wealth then feeds back into military strength, infrastructure, and global influence. At this point, the rising power becomes so economically and politically dominant that the rest of the world trusts its currency for trade and savings. Its currency becomes the global reserve currency, as the US dollar is currently. This is a huge advantage because when the world wants your currency, other countries buy your government's bonds to hold as safe investments. If you want to know more about what bonds are, you can watch our video explaining it, linked above. Because demand is high, you don't need to offer high interest rates to attract buyers, so you can borrow money more cheaply. The empire can run budget deficits without crisis, and its financial system becomes the centre of the global economy. However, this phase also sows the seeds of future problems. As the empire becomes wealthier, things start to shift. Government and citizens take on more debts, the population gets used to a high standard of living and becomes lazier. Citizens increasingly expect government benefits, protections, and subsidies. Political debates shift from how to grow the pie to how to divide the pie. People feel owed jobs, housing, healthcare, regardless of their productivity. Finally, military overreach and foreign entanglements become common. At the same time, the wealth created is not shared evenly. The rich go richer through ownership of assets, while the poor and middle class fall behind. Social tensions begin to rise. Eventually, rising debt and political division become unsustainable. Governments borrow and print money to cover deficits. Inflation rises. Trust in institutions and leaders declines. The society becomes polarized, with ideological extremes, protests, and instability. Meanwhile, a rival power is usually rising in the background, gaining strength economically, militarily, and technologically. The final blow is when the empire loses its reserve currency status, and with it, much of its influence. The currency falls, inflation worsens, and the country can no longer afford to project global power as it once did. At this point, the cycle ends, and a new empire begins to rise, often the same way the last one did centuries earlier. According to Dalio, the United States is in the late stages of this historical cycle. It has record high national debt, deep political polarization, falling trust in institutions, growing inequality and unrest, a currency that's still dominant but facing serious pressure. Meanwhile, China is following the early steps of the cycle that once made the US so powerful, investing heavily in education, infrastructure and innovation, building global trade networks like the Belt and Road Initiative, which is China's global infrastructure and investment project aimed at building trade routes and boosting economic ties across Asia, Africa and Europe, expanding its military reach and financial systems. Dalio warns that we may be entering a period of major global realignment, with power about to shift from west to east. What does this mean for us? Here's the key message. The world isn't ending, it's transitioning into a new kind of order. The economy isn't just falling, it's being reset. That could mean a new financial system, a shift in global power, and big changes in how we work, save and invest. Are we ready for what's next? If you found this breakdown helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you think. Thanks for watching. See you on the next one.